The sea always finds a way to return what it doesn't want to keep. A torn fishing net, a worn-out sandal, or a seashell, polished pale by the wind. But that morning, what washed ashore had teeth, a face, and no name that fit. Someone raised a camera. A photo began to spread, and before anyone could offer an explanation, it vanished as if it had never existed at all. No specimen, no conclusion, just a single image, and a chill in the spine that whispered this thing was never meant to be part of our world. They called it the Montauk Monster, not because they knew what it was, but because no one knew what else to call it. And perhaps the ocean still holds secrets that humanity isn't ready to unseal. The scene without explanation. The body lay motionless on the sand, right where the tide had just pulled back, half dry, half wet, like it had been hurled up from the deep and forgotten under the Montauk sun. Its frame was twisted, completely stripped of fur, leaving behind only a pale, blistered skin that looked like scorched rubber. The head was smaller than the body, but disturbingly shaped a domed forehead, a sharply pointed snout like that of a predator, and fangs that jutted out even with the mouth shut. The first person to find it, a local resident, didn't touch it. They simply took a photo, and as with most mysteries in the digital age, that photo surfaced online within hours. No edits, no embellishments, just a strange creature, lying there. No signs of being dragged in from elsewhere, no wounds, no visible trauma. And yet its form didn't match anything that had ever washed up on these shores before. That alone made it more disturbing than blood or gore. It was too intact to be a corpse, and too unnatural to be something nature meant to create. When the press refused to confirm, as the photo began to spread across social media, the press jumped in immediately. But instead of issuing any definitive statements, they offered only vague question marks. New York Magazine called it a mysterious creature. Fox News hinted that it might be a real-life monster. CNN took a more cautious approach, opting for the neutral phrasing, an unidentified animal. Everyone was circling around it, commenting on it, but no one dared to make a firm declaration, and oddly enough, no one seemed confident enough to dismiss it entirely either. Public interest exploded almost overnight, and with it came a wave of theories, multiplying like mushrooms after rain. Some biologists proposed that it was simply the decomposing carcass of a raccoon, its fur lost due to exposure to salt water and sunlight. Others leaned toward possibilities like a sea otter or even a bloated manatee. But none of the theories quite fit. The body proportions were off. The skull shape was unusual. The protruding canines looked mismatched. And above all, the skin was far too smooth, lacking any of the telltale traits seen in known mammal species. Gradually, a few experts began stepping away from the discussion altogether, citing the need for more physical samples to confirm. But by then, the body had vanished. No one kept it. No agency came to collect it. Everything passed as if it had been quietly erased, leaving behind an uneasy silence and a single, unanswered question: if it was just a normal animal, why couldn't anyone identify it? And if it wasn't, then what exactly were we looking at? Human psychology and the illusion of a face. What made the creature so disturbing wasn't its claws, its fangs, or the smell of sun-dried decay. It was the face, or more precisely, the suggestion of a face. No one could point to where its eyes were, or how its nose was shaped, or what expression it carried. And yet, almost everyone who looked at it felt the same thing. It was staring back, Science has a name for this phenomenon: pareidolia, the brain's unconscious tendency to find faces in everything, from cloud formations to coffee stains, even the surface of the moon. But when that effect appears on a creature that doesn't belong in any known category, something deeper in the human brain lights up. We don't just see a face, we start assigning emotion to it: anger, emptiness, or threat. On that unnatural body, the head had an oddly rounded shape, a snout that was sharp yet vaguely forehead-like. Faint creases near the top gave some the impression of furrowed brows. All of it worked just enough to convince the mind that what we were seeing was almost human. But not quite. And it's that almost that makes it so deeply unsettling, too familiar to ignore, yet too wrong to feel safe. Montauk, where every conspiracy intersects. Had that creature washed ashore anywhere else, the story might have ended with a few headlines and a half-hearted explanation. But it didn't drift in randomly. It came to Montauk, a place long submerged in rumors science refuses to acknowledge. Since the 1980s, this coastal town has been the epicenter of a conspiracy known as the Montauk Project. Whispers of inhumane experiments, memory manipulation, time travel, even the creation of artificial life have turned Montauk into the seaside counterpart of Area 51. There are no official documents, but there are testimonies. There are alleged witnesses, and there's an unsettling silence from those who once worked behind locked gates. So when an unidentifiable creature misshapen, half-beast, half-human suddenly appeared on this exact stretch of sand, collective imagination refused to stay quiet. People began asking, did it come from the ocean or from underground? Was it dumped or did it escape? Some went further, suspecting it was the byproduct of a leaked experiment, something the government failed to retrieve in time. There was no proof, but there was no convincing denial either. And sometimes, what makes a mystery truly frightening isn't how little we know, but the fact that it showed up exactly where we feared it might, scientific analysis, and the unsettling details that remain. After the media frenzy, scientists were brought in. A few experts quickly offered the most plausible explanation. It was merely the carcass of a raccoon, decomposed after drifting in salt water for an extended period, resulting in fur loss, tissue swelling, and distorted skin. On paper, it was a tidy conclusion. Raccoons match the size. They have sharp teeth, 5-fingered limbs, and when decomposed, their bodies can distort enough to defy recognition. But when comparing the photo to known specimens, certain mismatches began to emerge. The skull structure appeared too elongated compared to standard raccoon anatomy. The jaw had more pronounced canines than expected. And most notably, the snout was sharper and longer, evoking something halfway between a carnivore and something without a clear origin. The skin, too, posed questions. It was unusually smooth, almost too smooth. No fur, no scales, no visible lesions or breakdown, as if it never had an outer layer of protective tissue to begin with. Some veterinarians argued that fur loss from decomposition usually leaves uneven, damaged tissue beneath, but this creature did not. It was too intact and too unnatural. Adding to the mystery, no official tissue samples were ever taken for DNA analysis. The carcass vanished just a few days after being discovered. No retrieval records. No third-party examination. All speculation. All theory. Hinged on a single photo, a photo strange enough to invite doubt on its own. The scientific community never issued a formal conclusion, The best they offered was very likely a raccoon. But between very likely and definitely true lies, a gap one that logic alone can't easily close. And sometimes, it's in that very gap where legends continue to breathe, when fear doesn't need a name. In the end, what etched that creature into the public's memory wasn't what it was, but the fact that it was never properly named. No one ever stepped forward to explain, no agency retrieved the remains, no conclusion, no report, no official statement. And it was that void, not the creature itself, that sent a deeper chill down the spine. When something has a shape but no definition, the human brain starts to fill in the blanks with imagination. And imagination, as we all know, is rarely kind. Even the most deformed animal becomes less threatening the moment it has a name. But this thing had none. It didn't belong to any taxonomy. It wasn't tamed by language. It didn't growl. It didn't move. It left no trail when it vanished. And yet, somehow, it kept living through photographs, through crude drawings, through uncertain blog posts, and whispered stories passed between those who like to believe that the world still holds corners we haven't mapped. Maybe it was just a carcass washed ashore. Or maybe it was the last faint trace of something once made, then quietly erased. But what matters most is this: more than a decade has passed, and no one has ever come forward to say, we know what it was. And until that day comes, if it ever does, the Montauk Monster will continue to exist as it always has, a small wave, colder than the sea that carried it in. Before humans had computers, calendar apps, or smartwatches that predict rain better than your neighbor ever could, there was already a tiny little machine about the size of a shoebox sitting quietly at the bottom of the Greek Sea for over 2,000 years, just waiting to resurface one day and look at modern humanity like you really thought your tech was the peak of innovation. That corroded box, now known as the Antikythera mechanism, didn't just spin gears. It could calculate solar eclipses, track lunar cycles, and even predict the dates of the ancient Olympic Games. And here's the kicker: it was built in the 2nd century BCE, which means someone, living nearly 2 millennia before Google, managed to create a hand-cranked mechanical computer so precise, modern scientists had to pause and rethink everything. So the real question is, have we been underestimating the ancients this entire time? A chance dive uncovers a treasure no one understood. In 1901, a group of Greek sponge divers were searching for what else? Ancient statues and fancy wine from a sunken ship near the island of Antikythera. And sure enough, they found exactly what museums dream of: bronze heads, pottery, amphorae, the kind of artifacts curators would arm wrestle for. But buried among the treasure was a corroded chunk of metal, looking suspiciously like a broken gear from an old pocket watch. No one paid it much attention. The collective verdict: probably trash. It took nearly 70 years before researchers bothered to examine it more closely, using X-rays to literally peer through time. And then came the shock that so-called scrap turned out to be a highly complex mechanical computer, built as far back as the 2nd century BCE. In other words, they had accidentally fished up the ancient equivalent of an Apple Watch, except instead of showing missed calls, it displayed solar eclipses and upcoming Olympic Games, all powered by gears and hand cranks. No battery, no screen, no updates needed. And it still ran with the precision of a Swiss watch. What did this machine actually do, and why did it blow everyone's mind? At first glance, The Antikythera mechanism looked like nothing more than a rusted chunk of bronze with a few gears the size of bike parts. But once researchers scanned it with X-rays and reconstructed a 3D model, they collectively entered a brief please hold while my brain catches up moment. Because this little machine had over 30 interlocking gears, crafted with astonishing precision by hand, over 1,000 years ago. And no, it wasn't just for show. The Antikythera could track the lunar calendar with real astronomical accuracy, predict solar and lunar eclipses, calculate planetary alignments, and even display the date of the next Olympic Games, just in case you needed to start training early. It even featured rotating dials, pointer hands, degree scales, and complex astronomical diagrams, basically a fully functional ancient observatory, shrunk down to the size of a small wooden box. What stunned modern scientists most, it did all of this without electricity, without software, and without a single line of code. Everything ran on pure mechanical genius, and its accuracy still outperforms many medieval astronomical models. To put it simply, this was Google Calendar. Ancient edition, hand-cranked, and zero notifications, but somehow still more reliable than your alarm clock. Who built it, and why was there never a second one? This is the part that gives historians the biggest headache. Who on earth could have built something this advanced over 2,000 years ago? A machine with dozens of gears, running as smoothly as a Swiss watch, yet made in a time before screwdrivers or magnifying glasses even existed. The most widely accepted theory is that Greek astronomers created it, possibly from the school of Hipparchus, the genius who once calculated the distance from Earth to the Moon using nothing but careful observation. Some scholars even speculate that Archimedes might have laid the groundwork for its mechanics. But again, these are just educated guesses. There's no blueprint, no manual, and definitely no unboxing review on ancient YouTube. Even stranger, there's no second copy, no upgraded version, no technological descendants. This machine appeared once, then vanished. Like an ancient civilization dropped a next-level invention and forgot to hit save. It's funny on the surface, but also a little unsettling if they could build something this sophisticated. Why haven't we found another one? Maybe it was the work of one lone genius, and when he passed away, the technology retired with him. Or worse, an entire system of knowledge got lost to time, leaving behind just one mechanical breadcrumb on the sea floor, waiting for humanity to pull it up and start questioning everything we thought we knew about the history of invention. A timeline crisis in the history of technology. Before the Antikythera mechanism surfaced, literally, historians generally believed that precise mechanical technology, like interlocking gears and calculated motion, only began around the 14th century, with the appearance of tower clocks in Europe. In other words, it supposedly took over 1,000 years for humanity to go from rotating wheels for fun to machines that could actually do calculations. And then, a rusty hunk of bronze, lying quietly underwater for 2 millennia, punched that timeline square in the face. With over 30 intricately crafted gears, multi-layered design, and the ability to calculate astronomical cycles with shocking accuracy, the Antikythera mechanism wasn't just early, it was more advanced than many devices we didn't invent until much later. Which raises the uncomfortable possibility maybe our entire tech timeline has a big missing chapter, or worse. Maybe we've been reconstructing history based only on what survived, not what actually existed. This discovery forced archaeologists to rethink everything. What if the ancients weren't as simple as we assumed? What if, instead of just stargazing and sipping wine, they were quietly building mechanical computers that predicted solar eclipses. If history is a straight timeline, then Antikythera is a fast-forward button someone accidentally hit, launching ancient tech into a level we wouldn't catch up to for another 1,000 years. And the most unnerving part, this is just the one machine we happen to fish up. Who knows how many others are still sitting at the bottom of the sea, quietly waiting to rewrite everything. How does it work? At its core, the Antikythera mechanism functions like a mechanical brain. With a degree in astronomy, its gears were cut with incredibly precise ratios, meshing together to reflect complex celestial cycles, the kind of math that requires a scientific calculator and at least 3 cups of strong coffee just to begin to understand. A single turn of the crank corresponds to 1 lunar cycle, but that's just the start. It also includes adjustments for orbital irregularities, tracks the Saros cycle 18 years, 11 days used to predict eclipses, and models planetary retrograde motion. In short, the ancient Greeks weren't just stargazing, they were running metal-based simulations of the universe. And even today, with 3D scanning, AI, digital reconstructions, and CNC machines replicating every gear to the micrometer, researchers still find themselves scratching their heads. We're not entirely sure we understand how it all worked. We can recreate the shape, we can spin the gears. But to make the machine function exactly as the original did, to produce the same results the ancients calculated, remains an open challenge. There's no user manual, no assembly video, and if there ever was, it was probably handwritten in ancient Greek with no punctuation whatsoever. Bottom line, you can 3D print the casing, but to fully grasp how it thinks, good luck, and maybe brush up on your ancient astronomy while you're at it. So is the Antikythera mechanism really the first computer? The short answer, you could call it that if you're okay with no Wi-Fi and no retina display. Technically, the Antikythera mechanism doesn't process numbers like a modern digital computer, but it performs precise astronomical calculations entirely through pure mechanics gears, axles, and carefully calibrated ratios. It doesn't do addition or subtraction in the way we think of today, but it can calculate eclipses, planetary positions, and lunar cycles with an error margin so small, it's honestly a little annoying. And if this was just a random one-off machine dropped into the sea during a shipwreck, then that would mean it probably wasn't the only one. No one puts that much effort into building something that advanced just to make one copy and toss it on a boat. So the real question isn't, was this the first computer? It's, if the ancients could build this, what else did they build that we've never found? Maybe the history of human technology isn't a straight line from rock hammer to foldable touchscreen. Maybe it's more like the Antikythera itself spinning in circles, disappearing for centuries, and then suddenly reappearing just long enough to make the 21st century stop and wonder, what did we miss? Some disappearances haunt us because no trace is ever found. But there are others where the wreck turns up, and yet no one knows what really happened. A submarine thought long lost to World War II suddenly resurfaces in a place it was never supposed to be. No warning, no logbook, no record of its presence, and certainly no explanation for how it got there. History is usually good at remembering naval battles, final messages, and ships that go down, but in this case, every familiar clue is missing, as if someone had quietly erased the ending. And in the silence of the sea, only one thing remains: U-869. The original mission, and a route that never reached its destination. In early 1945, as World War II staggered toward its chaotic end, The German submarine U-869 was ordered to depart from the naval base in Kiel. Its destination, the waters off Gibraltar, a strategic hotspot where Allied supply ships frequently passed. It was a routine assignment, nothing top secret. The route was clearly mapped. The mission logs showed no irregularities. To the command officers, U-869 was just another cog in a war machine that was starting to creak and wheeze. The submarine left port and never came back. No signal, no warning, no final message. In post-war records, U-869 was simply listed as missing, most likely destroyed somewhere near Europe. Like hundreds of other wartime vessels, everything seemed wrapped up until a new set of coordinates surfaced, far beyond any prediction, and with it came a question that, to this day, no one has been able to answer with certainty. 1991, a deep dive and a truth no one asked for. Nearly half a century after U-869 vanished from wartime records, two civilian divers, John Chatterton and Richie Kohler, set off on a journey no one had requested, only to stumble upon a discovery that left military experts scratching their heads. During an exploration dive off the coast of New Jersey, they happened upon the wreck of a submarine lying more than 70 meters deep. No serial number, no obvious insignia, no label that said "Made in Germany, 1945." Just a massive steel shell, silent, seaweed-covered and with absolutely no business being there. At first, assuming no German U-boat would have vacationed off the U.S. coast mid-war, they thought it might be an old American sub or a training model. But the deeper they went, the more things didn't add up. Instead of calling it a day, they did what most governments take years to start doing. They investigated. For 6 years, the two amateur divers became part-time researchers examining every scrap of steel, every gear, every faded inscription, until they reached a conclusion no one had seen coming. It was U-869, a submarine supposedly lost near Europe, now sitting quietly off the American coast, as if challenging every history textbook to a rematch. Not in the records, and no one's claiming it. Identifying the wreck as U-869 should have been the end of the story. But instead, it turned out to be the opening chapter of a much bigger mystery. Once the confirmation came in, researchers started digging through every relevant document from German wartime dispatches to Allied naval engagement logs. The result? Not a single line suggesting U-869 had ever been anywhere near the east coast of the United States. German records confirmed the sub had been sent toward Gibraltar and may have been sunk in that area, a neat and tidy conclusion, wrapped in standard wartime procedure. Meanwhile, the U.S. Navy had logged no relevant encounters, no radar pings, no sonar hits, nothing suspicious. On paper, the submarine simply didn't exist there. No distress calls, no final transmissions, no last confirmations. As if the vessel's entire journey from the moment it left port to the moment it settled on the seafloor had been quietly cut from the official timeline. In a war where submarine positions were logged minute by minute, a vessel carrying 56 men vanishing, taking a detour no one planned, and going radio silent forever was kind of like a friend checking in for a trip to Europe, only for their suitcase to wash up in Canada 50 years later, and no one remembers them ever leaving home. The more theories there are, the stranger it gets. Once it was confirmed that the submarine resting off the coast of New Jersey was indeed U-869, the next question became far more complicated. Why was it there in the first place? No logbook, no radio transmissions, No final message, and certainly no explanation from anyone involved. So naturally, a flood of theories emerged, ranging from perfectly reasonable to plausible if you squint hard enough. Some experts suggested that U-869 may have suffered a technical failure, causing a torpedo to detonate inside the hull, a sadly not-so-rare ending for submarines, and an even less appealing one for anyone on board. Debris patterns lent some weight to that idea, but still didn't explain why the sub was even in that location. Others proposed that the crew might have received last-minute orders to change course, secretly sent to conduct reconnaissance or attacks along the U.S. coast, one of those missions everyone knows not to ask about. The problem: every single crew member perished. If there was an order, it went down with them. And then there's the possibility whispered, but never confirmed, that U-869 was sunk, and no one ever filed the paperwork. An accident, a mistaken skirmish, or a mutual blind eye turned during the fog of war. Whatever the real cause, one thing remains the same. A submarine vanished without an official ending, only for the truth to be pieced together decades later from rusted steel and unanswered questions. 56 men and a voyage with no return. Inside the wreck, everything looked as if time had forgotten to move. Unfired shells, a broken radio split in half, but still recognizable, and in a few shadowy corners, divers found small personal items so mundane they'd be easy to miss unless you realized someone once lived there. There were 56 crew members aboard U-869. None returned. No survivor. No witness. The entire submarine became a frozen slice of its final moment, silent, rusting, and untouched for over 45 years. The divers said there were moments when, shining a light through the torn steel doors, that the interior looked like someone had just left that morning. A tin cup still beside a bunk, a roll of paper carefully wrapped, a faint handprint on a metal wall. No one knows when it was left. No one knows what happened during those last moments. Did they realize they'd gone off course? Did someone try to radio for help, but never got the chance? Or did everything end too quickly before anyone even understood it had begun? Maybe one of them wrote a letter home. Maybe it just never got sent. Or worse, it did, but to the wrong side of the planet. A question mark outside the borders of history. Among the hundreds of submarines lost during World War II, very few managed to leave people both confused and feeling mildly trolled by history, like U-869. The wreck's location didn't match any known plan. No documents were leaked. No side appeared to be hiding anything. In fact, even if someone had wanted to cover it up, they wouldn't have needed to, because no one knew it was there in the first place. The story might have ended differently if the discovery had come from a major research institution with funding, sonar arrays, and a full tech team monitoring screens. But no, U-869 was found and identified by two amateur divers, tinkering with their own gear, collecting data piece by piece, and stubbornly pursuing a 6-year side quest to prove that something didn't quite line up with the historical map. No one knows exactly how it sank. No one knows why it was there. And no one can say for certain whether there are more U-boats lying silently in places they were never meant to be. If history is a map, U-869 isn't a missing piece. It's a giant question mark. Misplaced, defiant, and quietly suggesting that maybe we should double-check everything else too. If there's one place that makes archaeologists, geologists, divers, and Atlantis believers all squint suspiciously at the same patch of ocean. It's Yonaguni, a massive formation resting silently off the coast of Japan, large enough to grab attention. Strange enough that no one dares to name it definitively. It doesn't glow. It doesn't move. There are no ancient inscriptions or sculpted stone heads, but no one feels confident enough to say, "Relax, it's just a rock." So the real question isn't what it is, it's this why. After nearly 40 years of diving around it, has no one been able to say for sure? And if this is all just natural, then nature might be having a bit of fun with humanity's curiosity. One dive that shifted the whole archaeological conversation. In 1986, Kihachiro Arataka, a seasoned diving guide on Japan's Yonaguni Island, was on a routine dive just scouting scenic spots for tourists to watch fish. He wasn't searching for Atlantis. He had zero interest in lost civilizations. But somewhere off the island's rocky coast, he stumbled upon a massive underwater formation, and just like that, the fish were no longer the priority. This thing wasn't like other seafloor rocks. It had edges. It had flat surfaces. There were right angles, clean ones, like someone had brought a ruler and a box cutter to a geological party. As Aratake later put it, "I've never seen a rock underwater that geometric." It made me question nature's taste in design. He surfaced and reported it to the local authorities. And then silence. No excavation teams showed up. No universities dispatched research vessels. At the time, Yonaguni was politely filed under odd underwater structure and otherwise ignored. It wasn't until the early 1990s that researchers began paying attention. They dove in, examined the site, and soon joined the growing club of people scratching their heads at this bizarre chunk of seabed. But rather than unlocking its secrets, they ignited a debate that hasn't ended since, where each side is absolutely convinced the others are misinterpreting the rock. Right angles, terraces, and an underwater geometry test. When researchers first laid eyes on Yonaguni using their actual eyes, and a growing sense of disbelief, the first thing that stunned them was just how geometrically precise the entire formation looked. The structure, nearly 150 meters long and over 25 meters tall, wasn't just some random chunk of lumpy seafloor. It had extended flat surfaces running tens of meters. It had neatly spaced steps, like they'd been carved out with a prehistoric laser level. It had near-perfect right angles and stone platforms so smooth, you'd feel tempted to place a teacup on them just to see if it wobbled. In one section stood something resembling a truncated pyramid. Nearby, a stair-like path rose toward a higher ledge where some divers claimed it looked suspiciously like a ceremonial altar. And further out, a sunken amphitheater-style space, tiered and hollowed out, sparking comparisons to ancient arenas where someone might have once stood to speak or maybe perform an underwater monologue. Of course, it's all just stone. But if it is stone, then this stone seems to have passed geometry with honors and may have even taught a class or two. Plenty of non-archaeologist divers have surfaced saying roughly the same thing. "I don't know what this is." But calling it natural erosion feels like an insult to the creativity of wind and water. When nature starts taking geometry seriously. As excitement grew among those convinced this was a sunken ancient city, geologists stepped into the conversation with a cool rebuttal. It's just sedimentary rock. They argued that this area lies within a geologically layered zone, where rock naturally fractures along horizontal and vertical planes. Over time, this can create surfaces and angles that look intentional but aren't. Throw in thousands of years of wave erosion and tectonic activity, And a few rock ledges that resemble stairs aren't exactly shocking. In other words, nature could have built Yonaguni without any help from human hands, just time, pressure, and a surprisingly obsessive eye for symmetry. Still, there are a few details that make this natural formation theory wobble a bit. Like how the steps across Yonaguni often share a nearly identical height, roughly 35 centimeters each, or how certain floor surfaces are far flatter than what you'd expect from randomly eroded sedimentary rock, and how some blocks seem to be stacked in a tiered pattern, more like a festival stage than the random artwork of swirling tides. Could nature really be this precise? Or is this one of those rare moments when nature had too much time, developed a taste for aesthetics, and quietly borrowed a compass no one knew she had? If it was man-made, then by whom? And where did they learn architecture? Let's say, just hypothetically, that this really was a man-made structure. The next question would make every historian collectively choke on their coffee. Who could have built this more than 1,000 years ago? At that time, most scholars agree that the people around the Ryukyu Islands were still living in scattered hunter-gatherer communities. The concept of large-scale stone architecture, not exactly in the local curriculum, let alone the idea of constructing a massive stone complex under the ocean. Yet bold theories persist. Some independent archaeologists suggest this might be the remains of an ancient civilization once thriving somewhere in Asia, perhaps in eastern Atlantis, swallowed by a prehistoric cataclysm. Others offer more cautious ideas, linking Yonaguni to coastal communities around Okinawa. They speculate it could have been a ceremonial site, a place of worship, or even an astronomical marker before everything was drowned by post-ice age sea level rise. No matter how documentary-ready these theories sound, they all run into one very empty problem. Not a single artifact has ever been found. No tools, no pottery shards, no human remains, no trace of ancient campfires, just stone, endless stone, arranged with such intent that it almost feels like the rock itself is in on the secret. Things seen, but science isn't quite listening. Once Yonaguni caught the world's attention, especially the part of the world with cameras and dramatic voiceovers, it stopped being an odd rock formation and started becoming something that needs a documentary editing suite. Diving crews, independent researchers, amateur archaeologists, and TV producers all arrived, hoping to witness something no one else had, or at the very least, to retell the old mystery in a fresh, marketable way. One diver claimed he saw faded carvings on the rock. Another swore there was a sunken boulevard running across the formation like the main street of a prehistoric town. Someone else, after a few dives and a couple of thoughtful tea sessions, concluded it had once been a bustling settlement until the sea swallowed it in some long-lost tectonic tantrum. The problem? None of it can be proven. Every photo presented is too blurry. Every bold statement lacks physical evidence. And every time someone says they've decoded Yonaguni, another group dives in and responds. Actually, I saw something completely different. It's as if this place wasn't made to answer questions, but to generate more of them, and then quietly drown them beneath water so clear you can practically see the academic confusion floating in it. When history goes silent, will the stones keep speaking? Nearly 4 decades have passed since that fateful dive, and Yonaguni still lies there unmoving, unresponsive, and offering no comment on whether it's just an ordinary rock or the last whisper of an ancient civilization. Above the surface, the debates rage on, as if saying it louder might finally make the stones change their mind. There's no official excavation, no warning signs, no fences. Yonaguni isn't listed as a heritage site, nor is it dismissed as irrelevant. It floats somewhere in between, a kind of maybe something or maybe absolutely nothing. And strangely enough, that ambiguity has made it more compelling than anything with a neat label. Each diver who descends adds a new chapter. Some claim to see carvings, others swear they spot steps. Some see only rock and the soft disappointment of unmet expectations. But no one surfaces without at least one question echoing in their mind. Maybe Yonaguni is just a product of water, wind, and time, nothing more. Or maybe it's the remnants of a lost civilization, waiting for the right person to come along and tell its story. For now, it simply remains silent. But every time someone new dives down, the stones seem to speak not with words, but with edges too precise to ignore. Some disappearances happen in storms. Some leave behind distress calls. And then there are those rare ones that leave behind nothing but a blank spot on the map. No sound, no farewell, not even a piece of driftwood. This didn't take place in the far-off waters of Antarctica or the wild corners of the Pacific. It happened just off the east coast of the United States, where you can fish off a dock and still see city lights from shore. And what vanished wasn't a little dinghy. So what could possibly swallow an enormous ship and 309 people with such perfect silence? And more importantly, why, over a century later, do we still have absolutely no idea what happened? The Steel Giant and its final voyage. In the early 20th century, if there were a contest for biggest thing in the bay, the USS Cyclops would have been a top contender, stretching nearly 165 meters and weighing over 19,000 tons. It wasn't just a ship, it was a floating block of steel, designed to swallow mountains of coal and still glide smoothly across the ocean. Commissioned by the U.S. Navy in 1910, Cyclops wasn't built for glory or speed. It was a steel mule, hauling heavy materials for the fleet, especially coal and manganese ore, a key ingredient for making wartime steel. In February 1918, Cyclops departed Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, carrying 800 tons of manganese pretty much filled to the brim. The journey was uneventful. It docked in Barbados on March 3rd for fuel and some minor maintenance. On March 4th, it left port for the last time. The weather was fine. The sea was calm. The route was simple, from a small Caribbean island back to Baltimore, a voyage countless other ships had made and still make. But for Cyclops, it became a one-way trip straight out of the history books. No one saw it after that. And somehow, no one really knows where it vanished. No signal. No wreckage. Nothing. The problem wasn't that Cyclops vanished. Ships go missing, that's a tale as old as the sea. The real issue was that it vanished a little too cleanly. On March 4th, 1918, Cyclops left Barbados. From that moment on, it never sent another signal. No distress call. No mid-journey telegram. Not even a quick "the ship's wobbling, but we've got it under control." The weather that day, utterly unremarkable. The sea was as calm as a freshly stirred mojito. No storms. No seismic activity. No reports of hostile ships. The journey to Baltimore should have taken about a week, a routine route. So familiar it barely needed navigation. You could follow the stars and still get there on time. But Cyclops didn't arrive. And when the Navy went looking, they found absolutely nothing. No splinters, no metal scraps, no lifeboats, no emergency rafts. It was as if the ship and all 309 souls aboard had been copy-pasted right out of existence. Unplug a radio, and at least you get a click. Cyclops. Not even that. And as the questions started stacking up, one more truth became painfully clear. Even the location where it vanished is just an educated guess. Because, well, you get it, it left nothing behind. Theories that drift like lifebuoys. When a ship vanishes without a trace, the first human instinct isn't to search, it's to speculate. And the less evidence there is, the wilder the imagination gets. Some pointed to the cargo over the 10,000 tons of manganese, reportedly loaded unevenly toward the starboard side. If the sea turned rough, the weight imbalance could have tipped the ship fatally. Others recalled Cyclops had suffered engine trouble months earlier, patched up just enough to keep her moving. No one said it out loud, but the implication hung in the air, one bad wave at the wrong time. And silence would follow. Then came the human angle. Captain Worley, German-born. Naturalized American, had a reputation for being erratic. His leadership style drew complaints from more than a few officers. And out on open waters, command is everything. If there was tension on board, maybe the disappearance started in the wheelhouse. Not with the hull, but all of that mechanical issues. Interpersonal friction remains nothing more than nameless footnotes in a file with no photographs, no witnesses, no wreckage, no clear data to anchor the story. It's like trying to explain how someone vanished from a party that no one remembers them attending. No matter how convincing the theory sounds, it's still just a lifebuoy drifting in an ocean of uncertainty. Sister ships that disappeared the same way. If one ship vanishes, it's a mystery. But if 3 ships, built the same way, serving the same function, all disappear without a trace, that's no longer just an ocean story. It starts to sound like a quiet warning from naval architecture itself. USS Cyclops vanished in 1918, and while people were still scratching their heads, 2 of her sister ships, Proteus and Nereus, having been transferred to civilian hands and refitted for World War II, ended their journeys in exactly the same way. They left port, they set sail, and then nothing. No distress calls, no final log entries, not even a broken plank washing up on shore. All 3 vessels belong to the Proteus class, same frame design, same hull structure, and the same small but troublesome detail, a box-shaped steel frame known to be vulnerable when heavily loaded in rough seas. That little footnote in ship design, engineers only pointed it out after all 3 were already gone. Like discovering your sofa collapses only after 3 relatives have vanished into its cushions. But what haunts people most isn't the design, it's the repetition. 3 ships, 3 voyages, 3 complete disappearances, and not a single clue left behind. It feels like someone kept copying and pasting the same failure, and then hit hide from view after a century of searching. The scariest part is we still know nothing. The 21st century has brought us many things: Wi-Fi on planes, vacuuming robots, and submarines that can dive thousands of meters to photograph the ocean floor in resolution sharper than a passport photo. And yet, despite having the tech to scan every pebble beneath the sea, USS Cyclops remains completely silent. Dozens of expeditions have been launched, seafloor maps redrawn multiple times, and experts have combed through sonar blips like they're proofreading a novel that lost its last chapter. All for nothing. No wreck, no metal signal, not a single shape convincing enough to label possibly Cyclops without attaching 500 pages of assumptions. What stings most is this: no one knows where those 309 people are. There's no place to lay a wreath, no official memorial day, just a historical void, quietly tagged "update pending." And maybe, just maybe, if the truth really does lie somewhere on the ocean floor, it's lying very deep, very still, and very stubborn, as if the sea itself is whispering, "This one isn't for you." A ship, abandoned, drifting across the Pacific as if someone had stepped out for a breath of fresh air and never came back. No gunfire, no distress call, no wreckage, no farewell note, just a half-cooked pot of stew and a string of questions no one ever answered. Did the crew of MV Joyita panic and flee? Or did someone come aboard and ask everyone to leave? Were they forced off? Or did they choose to go? And if so, why leave everything behind, including dinner? Nearly 70 years later, what remains isn't evidence. It's the strange, lingering feeling that whoever left the ship last never intended to return. A short trip, a small ship, and a disappearance no one saw coming. MV Joyita wasn't the kind of vessel that turned heads. Compact, wooden-hulled, she had spent her life as a cargo boat, then a medical transport, then a mail ship, basically the Amazon Prime of the Pacific, before Wi-Fi and satellite tracking became a thing. On October 3rd, 1955, she set out from Samoa, headed for Tokelau, just about 430 kilometers away. Think London to Manchester. But with more salt water and no gas stations, the trip was expected to last less than 2 days. On board were 25 people deemed crew, 9 passengers, and a mix of cargo ranging from mail bags to a refrigerator, apparently headed for a tropical vacation. Weather: clear skies, stock photo perfect. Radio: functional. Forecast: as boring as late-night cable. Joyita sailed out in silence and kept that silence going for 5 weeks, until she returned, quietly, with no one at the helm and no one left to explain. And the more you looked, the more it felt like something was very, very wrong. It came back completely normal, unless you noticed everyone was gone. On November 10th, 5 weeks after vanishing, MV Joyita was spotted over 900 kilometers from where it started, listing quietly like a tired houseboat in the middle of the Pacific. No people, no sound, but the vessel somehow was still afloat, as if it was saying, "I'm fine, but everything else definitely isn't." Inside was the kind of scene that made even the authorities pause a crime scene, or the world's most confusing Halloween rehearsal. A pot of meat, mid-cook, a first aid kit exploded open, bloodied bandages scattered, a dismantled radio, a wall clock stuck precisely at 10:25, and every single radio dialed to the emergency frequency. The engine was dead. A leaking pipe had flooded the cargo hold with half a meter of water, and yet the strangest thing, the ship hadn't sunk. Joyita had been designed to be unsinkable even when full of water, and yet all 25 people, passengers and crew, had vanished without a trace, leaving behind a boat that felt eerily like someone had just stepped out to make tea and never came back. The entire scene radiated one unsettling truth: everything was still there except the people. The ship stayed afloat, but the people didn't stay on board. MV Joyita wasn't the type of vessel that just gave up and sank out of sadness. Built with a wooden hull and multiple sealed compartments, she was practically a floating corkboard capable of staying afloat even if half her body took on water and her engine was wheezing its last breath. And true enough, When she was found, Joyita was still afloat, just listing slightly like someone had napped on the wrong side of the mattress. No signs of fire, no damage severe enough to demand evacuation. But 25 people gone. Life jackets gone. All 4 lifeboats also gone. The question hung heavy: why would anyone abandon a ship that wasn't sinking? If it was panic, why didn't anyone send a distress call? If it was an orderly evacuation, why leave behind food, cargo, and the radio? And if they left, thinking the ship was doomed, where exactly were they planning to row to? In the middle of the Pacific, the nearest land was 3 days away. With fair weather, a GPS, a full snack pack, and an unshakable belief in miracles. The ship stayed up, but something else clearly went down. Theories, from plausible to self-published thriller material. When you're staring at a ship still afloat, food still warm, but not a single person in sight, the human brain does what it does best: start making stuff up to fill in the blanks. Some say the vessel began taking on water, and someone panicked. Maybe the captain, a man with old war injuries, thought the ship was going down and ordered an evacuation. Maybe. But then, why didn't anyone send a distress call? Especially when all the radios were tuned to the emergency frequency. Others whispered piracy. But if that were true, where were the signs of struggle? Where was the missing cargo? A few speculated about a fight on board a dispute. Something gone wrong, but if that's the case, why did everyone disappear at once? Like a group trip that forgot to come back. And then came the more Hollywood-centered ideas, political plots. Smuggling gone sideways. Or perhaps Joyita was carrying something or someone it wasn't supposed to. Each theory sounded like a movie, minus the based on a true story disclaimer. Yet after all the speculation, all the dead ends and dramatic retellings, MV Joyita's mystery still stands like a jigsaw puzzle, missing the very piece that makes it all make sense. Clues that seem deliberately left behind or deliberately erased. If Joyita were a detective film, this is the moment when the audience starts glancing sideways at each other and whispering, "Wait a minute, that doesn't really add up." The wall clock, frozen at exactly 10:25. Not 10:24. Not 10:26. As if someone planned the whole event just to cut the power at that precise moment and yell, "Cut." The radio, dismantled, not broken, just manually taken apart, left sitting there, like someone had every intention of calling for help, and then changed their mind at the last second, or got stopped, or cut off quite literally. A bit of blood on a bandage. No idea whose, no explanation why, no signs of a fight, no gunshots, no injuries left behind. Just a few drops. Just enough to suggest a dozen scenarios, none of which actually go anywhere. And strangest of all, every radio on the ship had been tuned to the emergency frequency, as if someone had tried their best to signal for help and then suddenly gave up. Everything about the scene felt intentional, and yet none of it pointed to any intention. As if someone had started telling a story, then deleted the second half, and left the audience guessing. Forever. In the middle of a warm sea, where coral dancers and groupers rarely panic, there exists a hole so massive that even science and modern technology have had to admit confusion. It's deep. It's dark. It doesn't reflect signals well, and most importantly, no one really knows where its bottom is. Scientists have tried to measure it. They've sent robots. They've used sonar, lasers, and a PhD-level patience. But the hole behaves like it's playing hide and seek the deeper you go. the more everything seems to fall out of sync. Welcome to the Dragon Hole, one of the rare places on Earth where modern science has to scratch its head and say, for now, let's just guess. A stain on the map where the sea holds its breath. Amid the tranquil turquoise waters of the Paracel Islands, under the sovereign territory of Vietnam, where fish swim without urgency and the waves seem to lull the ocean into a nap, appears a strange patch of sea. No roar, no whirlpools, just a mysteriously deep shade of blue, as if someone had accidentally spilled ink on the map. At first, only a few fishermen murmured half-jokingly, "The water over there doesn't feel like water." Then satellite images began revealing that there really was something perfectly round, unusually dark, and eerily still, like a question mark left unanswered in the middle of the ocean. In 2016, a group of Chinese scientists officially surveyed and named it Dragon Hole. Cool name. Sure, but they quickly realized that naming it was the easy part, because even the question of how deep is it turned out to be a scientific shrug. The hole doesn't growl. It doesn't drag ships down. It simply exists quietly, politely deep, but just enough to make every depth meter second-guess itself. The more you measure, the less you know. From the very first attempts to measure it, Dragon Hole, located in the waters of the Paracel Islands, under Vietnam's sovereignty, showed an impressively professional level of non-cooperation. Research teams arrived fully equipped with sonar, ROV submersibles, pressure sensors, engineers, and mental stability. And yet, the deeper they went, the worse the signals got, the weirder the data became, and the instruments started acting like they'd been hacked by a stingray with Wi-Fi. At first, it was estimated to be around 250 meters deep, a decent number enough to make scientists nod approvingly and mumble, respectable. Then another group reported 280 meters, then 300, and finally, a triumphant 301 meters, officially deeper than the reigning champion, Dean's Blue Hole in the Bahamas. Cue the celebration, until someone quietly added, "But we're not sure that's actually the bottom," because the sonar kept bouncing back, weaker and weaker. Yes, but still bouncing, like the hole was whispering. Still here, but not ready to explain. All of this unfolding in the calm-looking waters of the Paracels was enough to make science take a respectful step back. And if someone were to ask, "So, have we finished measuring it yet?" the most honest answer might just be, probably not. Deeper than data, the question of where it came from. With a depth of over 300 meters and a structure that doesn't exactly get along with measurement devices, the Dragon Hole in the waters of Vietnam's Paracel Islands leaves scientists puzzled not just by the question, how deep is it? But more intriguingly, where did it come from? Some theories point to ancient limestone collapse, like a cave ceiling giving way. But on a scale large enough to swallow submarines whole, over time, seawater seeped in and filled the void, forming a deep vertical shaft that now sits quietly in the middle of the sea. Others suggest it's a remnant from the last ice age, when sea levels were hundreds of meters lower and today's seafloor was once a landscape of dry, sun-beaten limestone ridges. But what makes the Dragon Hole special isn't just why it exists, it's how weirdly it behaves. Most blue holes have clean vertical walls, flat bottoms, and water that flows downward. This one spirals gently. The currents seem to push upward, and the bottom keeps refusing to confirm it's the bottom. It's like looking into a hole that isn't entirely sure where it ends either. And when science meets something this deep, this strange, and this unwilling to offer a continue button, human imagination quietly starts taking notes. Two worlds in one hole. It's called the Dragon Hole, but no dragon has ever surfaced breathing smoke or collecting tourist taxes. Instead, what lies inside is a two-layered world, and no, it's not office on top, break room below. The upper layer holds oxygen, faint light, and familiar life: seaweed, fish, a few jellyfish doing what looks like underwater yoga. But from about 100 meters down, everything changes. Abruptly, as if you'd just stepped out of your living room and into another planet. In the deeper layer, oxygen levels drop to nearly zero. Not the just breathe harder kind of low, more like good luck trying. And yet, something lives there. Ancient microorganisms, surviving by converting sulfur, basically the microbial equivalent of dining on something no human would ever dare to name. There are also blind fish, colorless, drifting slowly as if contemplating the meaning of existence. Scientists describe this zone as a living laboratory that mimics conditions on Mars or Europa, where only the smartest or most stubborn forms of life manage to hang on, which is also why most humans politely stop exploring at the oxygen layer rather than go poking around the alien basement, because even if there's no dragon, bumping into a grumpy prehistoric bacterium might still be enough to write a memoir. When science whispers, we're not sure. There are places on Earth where, even if you bring the best measuring gear, the most trusted PhDs, and an entire battalion of satellite data, the final verdict is still, we don't know. The Dragon Hole, in the waters of Vietnam's Paracel Islands, is one of those places. Its geological structure isn't the neat, vertical kind with clear walls. It's more like a swirled pudding, layered with limestone shelves and spiraling currents that make sonar signals. Nervous, devices send sound waves down, but what comes back often returns out of sync, scrambled, or echoing like it's playing peekaboo underwater. Some experts have even joked that it's the place where sound gets lost trying to find itself. And whenever science hesitates, imagination starts speaking a little louder. Some believe it could be the gateway to a mythical dragon realm. Others float theories about a tunnel to the Earth's core. One brave soul even suggested it's a kind of underwater exit ramp for aliens after they're done surveying humanity. No one's proven anything yet, and no one's been sucked into it either, but the fact that science still hasn't confirmed the bottom is more than enough for wild theories to thrive like deep-sea fish with internet access.